That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
All right, guys, we are going to continue to talk about stacking teams because I've made 2 videos about this so far. I covered the Seattle Seahawks. I covered the San Francisco 49ers, but it's going to be hard to pull off. And that's one thing most people overlook with stacking is, yes, it is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, especially if you go in there and having one team in mind. If you do that, you are almost guaranteed to reach on a player rather than letting the draft come to you, which I always advise. The last thing I tell people, especially people on Patreon, when I get a DM saying, hey, I got this startup, what should I do with my first 3 picks? And the 101 hasn't even gone off the board yet. I think that you should have a general gauge on your league settings. You should have a general gauge of the positions you are going to be targeting, but we should not necessarily go in with our draft exactly mapped out, because when you do that, that's how you reach for players and that's how you make mistakes. So what I'm going to continue to do is I'm going to continue to identify a couple more offenses, because I don't think you can do this necessarily with every offense in the NFL, just because some really you would have to reach on value and they're really capped out at their potential. But there's a good handful of them that you can implement this strategy on, and we can increase our chances at winning our Dynasty League, which is mainly the objective. I know I've said the statistic on multiple videos, especially these stacking videos, because I cannot stress it enough. One team out of the 12 teams in your league is going to win the title. So we should be doing everything in our powers to go out there and raise the ceiling on our Dynasty team. We should be making bets that if they work off, another one's going to. We want to set off dominoes for us to get to that championship level. We don't really care if we get last place, because getting last place in Dynasty is better than getting 6th place in Dynasty. You're going to have a higher rookie pick, and you went all out with your strategy, and you're going to be able to retool right away. If you diversify across a multitude of NFL teams, you don't really make any compounding bets. What's going to happen? You're going to have a mediocre team, and even if one of these teams goes off, you're only going to be able to profit off a little bit, while the other positions on your roster don't necessarily increase with value with your other bets. So this video, we are going to talk about the Tennessee Titans, and the reason I think that they are a fantastic team to go out there and try to stack is where their current players are going in startup drafts and the projections for them for 2020. So first, let's start with the quarterback position, then we will get into A.J. Brown, then possibly Jonnu Smith, and this is all about Ryan Tannehill. I'll be the first person to say that I did not necessarily go out there and buy Ryan Tannehill at all in Dynasty whenever he signed with Tennessee. I looked at that Marcus Mariota and Ryan Tannehill situation and said, you know what, I really don't want either of these guys. I don't think the ceiling is necessarily there. I had Ryan Tannehill on one Dynasty team, and as soon as he got that starting job, I shipped him off with what looks like a horrible deal 6 months later. But that's the thing with Dynasty. Sometimes you have to acknowledge when you're wrong, and sometimes you have to be willing to shift, like I have been with so many players, and y'all know I'm the first person to say whenever I was wrong and make a switch. Now, if we look at Ryan Tannehill and look at what he did last season, this is going to really be able to help us project him out for years to come. And we know in Dynasty, we're not just playing for 2020. So in the majority of this video, I'm going to be talking about the 2020 season, but we have to keep in the back of our minds the long-term situations for these players. And Ryan Tannehill's long-term outlook is fantastic. I mean, he's only 31 years old, which we know age essentially does not matter at the quarterback position. What really matters is that contract. And he just signed a contract extension this offseason, which many people overlook. And I think it's weird that they are overlooking it, because the Tennessee Titans really can't get out of this contract for another 2 or 3 years. So Ryan Tannehill is on a short list of NFL quarterbacks that has a job secured for 2 to 3 years to come. I mean, I know that does not sound like a big deal, but guys, think about 3 years ago. Think about 2017, what you were doing then. I mean, if you have this guy on your Dynasty team for that long, he's more than likely going to pay off, and that's his floor. Maybe he is a starter in the NFL for another 5-6 years. I'm not going to bother trying to project that far out, just because that's kind of insane. Yet we know that Ryan Tannehill in his short-term future for the next 2 to 3 years are secure in Tennessee. So that makes him appealing in Superflex Dynasty leagues, not only in one quarterback leagues. So now let's go to what he was able to accomplish in 2019. And the entire story about Ryan Tannehill's 2019 performance was efficiency. So Ryan Tannehill did not necessarily see the volume that we saw other NFL quarterbacks receive, but it does not necessarily matter because at the quarterback position, it is not necessarily like the running back position. The running back position in fantasy, all we care about is volume. Efficiency is not necessarily sticky year to year, but the quarterback position, you can be highly prolific even if you don't have the pass attempts, even if you don't have the volume, and that's what we saw with Ryan Tannehill. So in weeks 7 through 16, so when Ryan Tannehill took the job over from Marcus Mariota officially, he averaged 28.6 pass attempts per game, which was on the lower side of the NFL. We know that the Tennessee Titans were actually able to just run Derrick Henry, pretty much their entire offense through him, which is something extremely, extremely hard to predict year over year. And that's been pretty much the entire thesis around all of these videos. We're looking at these extremely run heavy teams, and we can acknowledge that year over year, it's hard to do that. It's hard to have a top defense in the NFL, and it's hard to just play keep away from the other team. So yes, Derrick Henry is a fantastic player. The Tennessee Titans are going into 2020 with a run heavy approach, but a multitude of things can happen to change this away. So with this 28.6 pass attempts per game for Ryan Tannehill in 2019, this can easily increase, and that's the entire reason we are going for this stack. So if we look at his efficiency stats, I mean, they are just off the charts. A 70% completion percentage, 274 yards a game, 2.2 touchdowns a game, and about half an interception a game. So, I mean, this is good for his efficiency to boost him up to quarterback 3 in weeks 7 through 16 in points per game. I mean, this is ridiculous. You would never assume that Ryan Tannehill, while he was starting, was the overall quarterback 3 in terms of points per game during this stretch. And this is a small sample size, but we have to understand the entire NFL is a small sample size. We are only getting 16 games to go off of. So if we're looking at this, 9-week sample here, I mean, that's pretty much exactly what we're seeing with other players. And now the important part. This is where I bring y'all real value. This is where I talk about real information, where Ryan Tannehill is currently going in Dynasty startups. Y'all know I'm constantly running leagues for the people on Patreon. Really want to give y'all a shout out real quick. Y'all know I support y'all. Y'all know y'all are the ones to run this show. And in these Dynasty startups, the last 3 ones we did, which were all took place within a month from now, Ryan Tannehill went as the QB 21, the QB 20, and the QB 17. So a very manageable price, especially if you consider that he does have that long-term stability with the contract. And we know that Ryan Tannehill's efficiency is going to regress in 2020. But I think that even though his efficiency can drastically regress, what happens when Derrick Henry gets hurt? What happens if Derrick Henry is just not as effective as he was a year ago? What happens if teams are able to game plan against this Ryan Tannehill run-heavy Tennessee Titans offense and they are forced to throw the ball? If we see Ryan Tannehill's volume just go up to about league average or maybe even a little bit more, I mean, these numbers that Ryan Tannehill saw in 2019, while they may be less efficient, the overall volume is going to boost them to be extremely comparable to what we saw. So I'm not projecting Ryan Tannehill by any means to be the quarterback 3 again. I don't even think that's his ceiling for 2020. I'd see his ceiling as being a mid QB1, but when you're drafting him as a low-end quarterback 2 in a Superflex league where he has years to come with production, that is all value. Now, let's get to the centerpiece of this stack. Let's get to the guy that you're actually going to have to go out there and pay up for, and this is A.J. Brown. And the reason you're going to have to go out there and pay that pretty penny for A.J. Brown is he is an athlete. He is a special talent. He's only 23 years old. He was selected in the 2nd round last offseason. And I think it's fair to say that A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf were both criminally underrated in the NFL draft just because NFL teams didn't know, hey, I mean, is this guy propping up the other one? Are they both talented? Are neither of them talented? And it turns out that DK Metcalf and A.J. Brown both smashed. So if we're looking at their draft capital a year later, I think it's kind of irrelevant. I think if A.J. Brown was on a college team without DK Metcalf, he would have easily been a round 1 pick. I mean, he looks very comparable to the guy who everybody is on this offseason in CeeDee Lamb. He has the talent. He is the alpha in Tennessee. I mean, we see this just with his frame. I mean, he's 6 foot, 226 pounds. This is exactly what you want to see from one of these guys that's going to command a ton of targets. And I'll be the first one to say, guys, I went out there. I told y'all not to draft A.J. Brown last offseason. I had him as my wide receiver 1 before the NFL draft, and once he fell to the end of the 2nd round, once he went out there and fell in an offense with Corey Davis. While I still believed in Corey Davis, I was off of him. I, like many others, thought it was a poor landing spot. I told y'all not to draft him, and I'm going to apologize for that. That is a horrible, horrible take by me, centered around my blind Corey Davis love last offseason. But like I said, with Ryan Tannehill, we got to move on. We got to look past it, and let's look at what A.J. Brown was actually able to do in his rookie season. And if we split this in two, if we look at the first half with Marcus Mariota and the second half with Ryan Tannehill, it's a completely different story. So in the first weeks 1 through 6 with Marcus Mariota starting, he averaged only 2 receptions, 45 yards, and 1 touchdown every 3 games. So marks that really did not show any talent, marks that didn't necessarily show a fantasy weapon whatsoever. I mean, he was the wide receiver 68 in points per game during the stretch, so he was not getting anywhere close to your starting lineup. But as soon as Ryan Tannehill takes over, this offense completely changes, and we see him actually go to averaging almost 4 receptions a game, 77 yards a game, and over half a touchdown a game. So, I mean, this is a completely different wide receiver in a completely different offense with Ryan Tannehill, and he actually finishes as the wide receiver 11 in terms of points per game over this stretch. So it's a guy that, if you look at the second half of his season, maybe you can project him out and say, hey, I mean, this is a consistent low-end wide receiver 1, and we should be drafting him that way. Now, I'm not going to project him to be there for 2020 purely off of his efficiency last season. I mean, he was not necessarily getting the volume. But the story we are telling ourselves when we go out there, stack Ryan Tannehill and A.J. Brown is, yes, the efficiency is going to go down. But what happens when the volume drastically increases for one reason or another? Maybe just with Ryan Tannehill being in the offense for an entire offseason, they feel more confident to open up the offense. They feel more confident to throw the ball more, especially with A.J. Brown taking a step forward. So now let's look at where A.J. Brown is currently being drafted in Dynasty startup drafts. I mean, like I said, these are not mock drafts. These are real Dynasty startup drafts, which people are paying to participate in, and there is a real prize pool. So in the last 3 drafts, A.J. Brown has gone as the wide receiver 12, the wide receiver 6, and the wide receiver 8. Now, this is a wide range, and this is where we get into the nuance of the strategy. So like I said at the beginning of the video, you are not going to be able to go into a startup draft, and you are not going to be able to tell yourself, I am going out there and I'm going to stack the Tennessee Titans. But what you can do is you can be flexible. You can keep an eye on players, you can keep an eye on target players, and choose which one falls far enough. So like the video we made a couple days ago, maybe DK Metcalf is the guy that falls to wide receiver 12. Maybe you then select DK Metcalf and stack him with Russell Wilson later, or you go out there and trade for Russell Wilson. But with A.J. Brown, what is nice is he's going at a range so far before Ryan Tannehill, you're going to easily have that game plan if you see A.J. Brown fall to a range you are comfortable taking him in. So by no means am I really going out there and advocating for someone to take A.J. Brown as the wide receiver 6 or even the wide receiver 8. But if he gets into that wide receiver 10, 11, 12 range, and you end up taking him as your wide receiver 1, it makes sense to go out there and take a bet on the offense and draft Ryan Tannehill as either your QB1 later on and go kind of a 0 quarterback route, or you really lock him in as your quarterback 2 in Superflex leagues. Now, let's talk about if you were able to get both of those guys in what you really want to do to unlock your ceiling and to really put all your chips in on this Tennessee Titans offense in 2020 and beyond. Now, you're going to finish it off with Jonnu Smith, and I mean, he's going to be cheap. You're not going to have to pay up for him, and you're going to be able to take him at a range where you feel comfortable. And the thing with Jonnu Smith is, yes, he has not been overwhelming so far in his NFL career. But you have to zoom back, and I don't know if y'all were playing Dynasty back in 2017 when Jonnu Smith came into the league. I was, and the entire story around Jonnu Smith as a prospect was, hey, this guy is a great athlete. This guy has all the tools to be a great tight end, but he's not polished yet. It's going to take him some time in the NFL to get going. And what has Jonnu Smith had so far? He's had time in the NFL. He's flashed where he's needed to, and he's showed that he has those tools, even if he has not necessarily been able to put it together for an entire stretch, which I argue maybe he was actually able to do that in the second half of the 2019 season. So if we look at this 24-year-old who has a 93rd percentile SPARQ score, and we split his season similar to how we did with A.J. Brown, in weeks 1 through 6 with Marcus Mariota, he averaged a laughable 2.4 points per game in PPR leagues. And if we extrapolate that out to what he would have averaged in terms of points per game with Ryan Tannehill, he would have been the tight end 48. So a low-end tight end 4, high-end tight end 5, something that you have no interest in being on your dynasty team. But if we look at from when Ryan Tannehill comes into this offense and replaces Marcus Mariota, in weeks 7 through 16, Jonnu Smith actually finishes as the tight end 14 in points per game as a raw second-year tight end at a position that takes time to develop at the NFL level. So we see Jonnu Smith being a guy that has all the tools, and we were told that all he needs is time. He's had time, he's flashed when he's needed to, and currently he's been drafted as right around the tight end 17 pretty much consistently across all flock leagues, and he was able to finish higher than that in the second half of last season. I mean, this is a guy that if you're going out there and you're betting on the Tennessee Titans to throw the ball more in 2020, he would massively benefit from it, and he can be efficient with his targets, and he can put up fantasy production. So if you go out there, you start your draft with A.J. Brown, say in the 4th round of a Superflex league, you follow it up with Ryan Tannehill in the 7th round, I think it makes sense to go out there and get Jonnu Smith as your tight end 1, and you can draft him at tight end 2 prices and push all your chips in. And if anything happens in that Ryan Tannehill-led Tennessee Titans offense, I mean, you have the triple stack. You are able to get these pieces for cheap, and you are going to be able to have a massive edge on your opponents compared to what they paid for what they got. Now, that's all I got for you guys. I know the Tennessee Titans is not going to be for everyone, but this is a cheaper stack, and that's why it may make sense to go out there and get it. And yeah, that's all I got for y'all. Have a great day.
That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.